Well, welcome everybody. I'm Mayor Cyril Kleem. This is our first session of the Citizens Digital Academy. I had an idea for this academy really in the last month or so. I learned that as I post things on Facebook and update people and inform people, in many cases they say to me, "Hey, I'm glad you told me that. I didn't know anything about that." So I thought what we would do is have a Citizens Digital Academy where I would talk to people who work for the city of Berea, different directors, the police and fire chief and other people. And we would just inform the public about the things that we do, how your local government operates. And so today's our first session, and I'm joined by Barb Jones, who's our city law director as well as safety director. Barb's been with the city for a number of years, has had a number of different responsibilities. She's very knowledgeable. The last several years, she's held the two different jobs of law director and safety director. So as law director, she handles all the city's legal matters, writes the city's legislation, different legislative pieces that come before city council. She also handles prosecution. She has two prosecutors who work for her. And as safety director, she would be in charge of the city's police and fire departments. So today we're starting with really the basics of city government. And that's why I had Barb join us. She's going to talk about the city charter, which is the foundation of how we operate. And then in coming weeks, we'll talk about finances and various city departments. So, Barb, welcome aboard.
Thanks, Mayor.
And
I'm very happy to participate.
yeah, thank you for doing it. I'm going to turn it over to you. Just jump right in and give us your presentation on the city charter.
Okay. Well, as you all know, we have Berea is a charter form of government. And I think a lot of times when there are misunderstandings about how government works, it's because sometimes there's a fundamental misunderstanding as to how city government operates. And that's because every city in the state of Ohio has home rule authority, and then some cities on top of that are considered charter cities. And so it's when people compare or say, well, why don't you do that the way another city does it? It's simply because our city charter and our form of government may not permit a response in that manner. So as I said, I think this will be really helpful to a number of residents to better learn what the source of our authority is. Basically, these are the places I need to look whenever I'm looking into new legislation or determining whether or not we can take any particular action. And that's first, obviously, we look at the U.S. Constitution. Because no matter what the Ohio Constitution may say, no matter what our charter may say, it still has to comply with the U.S. Constitution. And primarily, the U.S. Constitution, like our city charter and like the Ohio Constitution, sets up the form of government. It sets up what the branches of government are, how they interrelate with each other, and then what the basic rights and responsibilities that the government has to its people. And so under the U.S. Constitution, we also have to be concerned about federal law and federal regulations. And then on a state level, we have our Ohio Constitution. And all of Ohio cities and other government entities operate through and can only operate through the authority granted to us through the Ohio Constitution. And so we have a state legislature that passes statutes, enables regulations, and then under that you have either charter cities or statutory cities. And charter cities are those that are established through a charter or through a city constitution, or statutory cities that are formed by the Ohio legislature. And then all cities have the ability to make ordinances and regulations. So there's a pretty steep list of considerations and legal sources that we all need to look to in determining whether or not we can pass a parking ordinance or pass a tax ordinance, that all of these things come into play.
Hey, Barb, before you go on, what determines if a city is a charter or statutory city?
Well, cities can become charter cities, and that becomes a vote of the people within a city, determine whether or not they would like to have that ultimate home rule authority. And then it's up to the city in a general election. A city council, for example, can't determine whether or not they're going to have a charter. It's up to the people, the residents, the voters of that city, who determine whether there's going to be a charter. And then there's a commission appointed, so it has broad representation by council, by the mayor, to determine what will be in that charter.
Okay, so our city's original charter goes back many, many years.
Yes.
So at some point, more than 50 years ago, the residents of Berea voted to become a charter city.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Now, when I said that we all have to follow things, like we have to make sure that our laws are fall under the U.S. Constitution and the Ohio Constitution, and we tend to think that the city charter is the city's constitution. But occasionally there have been times when state law has said it doesn't matter what's in your charter, that your charter provision may not be valid. And a recent, in the last maybe 10 years or so, example of this is many city charters used to say that employees needed to be residents of their cities. And in fact, our charter has said that directors must be qualified electors, which means that you're residents of the city. And our charter contains that provision. However, the Ohio Supreme Court has since said, as a matter of constitutional law, that provision is invalid. So that's an example where we typically say that the city charter, the state constitution, or the United States Constitution is supreme. There are occasions where something will trump, if you will, or supersede the city charter, and that's one recent example. The Ohio Supreme Court over the past 10 or 15 years has not necessarily been friendly to local home rule. In other words, there have been more and more matters where the Ohio Supreme Court has said that there's an overriding state interest under the Constitution that means that cities that have charter provisions may be invalid. And in the case of the residency of employees, and one of the big cases that brought this to light was out of the city of Cleveland, where they required all of their employees to live there. The Ohio Supreme Court, in essence, said that it's a matter of statewide concern and you can't say where your employees live. Now, our provision for succession purposes still would require that a qualified elector succeed the mayor in the case that he would be unable to fulfill his term. But the directors themselves otherwise don't need to live in the city, not because our charter doesn't require it, but because the Ohio Supreme Court has said it's not a valid provision.
So to that point, if for some reason I could no longer serve, or, God forbid I passed away, right? One of the directors, according to the charter, one of the directors would become mayor.
Correct.
But the directors aren't required to live here, but it's a requirement to live here to be the mayor.
Correct.
So, for example, if we had a director who doesn't live here, that person would not even be considered becoming the next mayor.
Correct. And I think what you have is the charter addresses what happens in a succession situation. And if all directors lived out of the city, then I think what you would have is that none of those would be qualified, and then it would go to, after the directors, the next option under the charter. Mm-hmm. So as I said, it's as a practical matter, it's usually best, or probably smart to have one or more directors that do live in town just for that purpose. But
And we
under
do,
the Ohio,
for the public listening, we do. Most of our directors live here, so.
yes, yes. Organizationally, under the Ohio Constitution, as we said before, there's basically two forms of government. One is a statutory city and one is a charter city. And if it's a statutory city, it generally falls under one of three forms. One is a commission plan, which is not very popular. City management, a manager plan, which is becoming a little more popular, particularly in Southern Ohio, and a federal plan where you elect officials. Charter cities can be a hybrid of any of the above or some other form. And in fact, the city of Berea follows somewhat of a modified federal plan. And basically in a federal plan, you elect your public officials. So you elect your mayor and your council, as opposed to, for example, a city manager where you elect a council member and they hire a manager to run the city. And a variation of this would be in some other cities that are, our neighbors. They may also elect a law director and they may elect an auditor for their city. But under our plan, under the charter, following a modified federal plan, the only elected officials are the mayor and members of city council. The authority of a mayor or city council varies by city, and it all depends on how it's established in your charter. And oftentimes you may hear us at city council talk about a strong mayor form of government. That's what our charter provides for. And sometimes when you hear in other cities council taking certain action, and you wonder, well, why doesn't our council do that? It very well could be because that other city has a strong council form of government. For example, in our form, the emphasis is on the mayor, where the mayor enjoys executive power, power of appointment, veto power, and runs the daily operations of the city. In a strong council form of government, the council may have both legislative and administrative powers. The council may confirm appointments. They may direct daily operations, and they may appoint people to boards and commissions. Under the city of Berea, our charter, item 3, number 1, the executive and administrative authority vests in the mayor. And likewise, in the charter specifically states that the powers of council shall be legislative only and shall perform no administrative duties. It shall not appoint people other than those in its own body, unless there's another provision of the charter that provides for that. So it's clear from these two provisions that the city of Berea, when it adopted its charter many years ago, saw the wisdom of a strong mayoral system. So if you look at our specific charter, these are the duties that are provided for by 3 parties. And I think it's important just to make a note. You'll see here that I have 3 columns. We have the mayor, we have city council. But what our charter does a little differently than in many other cities is we provide for a separate office of the president of council. Many cities simply, their city council elects their own president of council to perform administrative functions for that council body. Our charter is somewhat unique in that under the charter, the president of council really isn't even a member of council. The council president has very specific duties and very limited duties: to preside over council meetings, to make appointments to council committees, to chair the coordinating committee, and to do anything else the council assigns to him or her in their office as president. It's the council members themselves, and those are our 5 ward council members and our 2 at large. And again, some cities have all at-large council members. Some have all ward members. We sort of have a hybrid. So you have local representation and city representation on council. But basically, the city council, the council president under our form doesn't have a vote. And the city council members are the members that approve, appropriate funds, and carry out any other duties that are required either by the Ohio Revised Code or by our charter. And again, in our form of mayoral government, the mayor is the conservator of the peace. He supervises administrative affairs, enforces ordinances, recommends legislation, advises council about finances, has veto power, and appoints employees. And these are all duties imposed by the charter. It's nothing that just, that happens election by election or based on the personalities of the parties involved. This is what's required no matter who is in office. These are the duties imposed by the charter on people holding these offices. Now, our city charter also establishes administrative departments and requirements. For example, in my case as a public safety director, it establishes the qualifications of the director. So there are some limitations in terms of when you choose directors that you do need to follow the charter in that regard. But the charter, for example, in the Department of Public Safety also vests the police and fire chiefs with the ability to conduct the day-to-day operations and to supervise and organize their division. So, as I said, the charter sets up the relationship between city council and the mayor. It also establishes administrative departments. And again, under that framework then, council in terms of ordinances and the mayor in terms of organizationally can make some alterations within that to best function and best, most efficiently serve the residents. And the last thing that the charter does is it establishes boards and commissions, or not the last thing necessarily, but the charter also establishes boards and commissions, and these are generally groups of residents that serve as guidance or checks and balances on both the administration and on city council. A good example of that is the Municipal Planning Commission, where they sort of control the zoning and are a check and balance on the zoning administrator. And likewise, the Civil Service Commission, which is a check and balance on the administration in terms of hiring practices for classified employees.
And by classified employees, that refers specifically to police and fire.
And service, our classified employees are those that that police or fire employees of those departments, or if they're otherwise covered by a collective bargaining agreement.
Right. So in the case of Berea, when for the general public who might not be familiar with the terms, collective bargaining agreement means they belong to a union.
Correct.
So in our case, our unionized employees are police and fire and service employees.
Correct. And as I said, so we have a Civil Service Commission that's established pursuant to state law that governs how we operate and hire in those positions. At the same time, Ohio law also provides for at-will employees for other employees. And so, as I said, but the charter actually establishes these boards and commissions and tells us how many people are on those commissions and what the limitations of their duties are. So we have a charter that establishes the mayoral system, council system. It establishes how residents interact through boards and commissions. And last, it establishes basic procedures. And for example, the charter establishes how we elect officials. It gives procedures for how we levy taxes and how we assess taxes, how we conduct and provide public improvements. And so basically, if you think of the charter, it's an outline. It's an umbrella. And everything the council and the mayor does needs to fall under that umbrella. Or if you look at a skeleton, it's the bones. And then council and the mayor, through their respective duties, can put the muscle and the flesh on the bones, but the bones are established through the charter itself.
So Barb, the charter we have today is not the same charter we had 50 years ago. So there is a procedure in place to change it.
That's correct. Once a charter is established, then every charter needs a provision in terms of how to change it. And that's done through charter review commissions. And every 5 years under our charter, a charter review commission is put together, and their job is to determine what, if any, changes to the charter need to be made. And they make recommendations, and then those recommendations go to city council, and city council determines what, if any, of those measures go on the ballot. And then the residents themselves get to choose how this foundational document gets amended, if it gets amended. Mm-hmm. It's deliberately a difficult process to do. And that's why, for example, in all the years, the U.S. Constitution has very seldom been amended. And that's because it's a cumbersome process. And so likewise, we want to make sure that changes to the charter are done very thoughtfully and carefully. And that's through recommendations of a charter review commission to the city council.
And then the city council determines which of those recommendations, if any, go onto the November ballot.
Correct.
And then the public votes on accepting or not accepting those recommendations.
Correct.
So the last one we had, which I think was 4 years ago,
mm-hmm.
And we do this every 5 years, we had some pretty significant recommendations that did make it to the vote of the public. Mm-hmm. And the two that come to mind, one was changing the city's elections from partisan to nonpartisan. So we went from running with a party label or as an independent to everyone just runs and there's no parties involved. Mm-hmm. That passed by a large margin. And then there was a second one that extended city council's terms from 2 years to 4 years, and that one failed. You know, so what that said to me was the public pays pretty close attention to actually reading these sometimes detailed proposals.
I think you're right.
If we could see in the same election one very significant issue passed and one very significant issue failed.
And I think people understand the importance of a charter, of a proposed charter change, and take the time to understand those.
Right. Well, Barb, I appreciate your time. You did a real good job today. I mean, it was very informative and I think easy to understand, and appreciate you taking the time for this. I think in the future, we'll probably be looking at another session of the Citizens Digital Academy, maybe in a week or so. We're going to talk about finances. So I have the finance director here, as well as our budget administrator, and we're going to tackle those tough issues related to city taxes and how we budget and go about preparing our budget and doing city finance. In the meantime, you can certainly ask us questions on Facebook. This will also be on our city webpage. We'll try our best to get to the Facebook questions and respond to those. So I appreciate your time, Barb, once again, and thank you for all those. Yeah, thank you, and thank you for all those who are joining us and who will leave questions for us. We'll see you again soon.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.